Hello and welcome to the Week 1 lecture for Management 403. My name is Peter Lucash and I'm your instructor for this class. This week we'll talk about a couple things as far as what's required for our first week. First thing I'm going to ask you to do is to develop what I'll call a personal elevator pitch. 200 to 300 words and posted within Oaks under the discussion forum marked introductions. Your name, what year you're in, perhaps where you're from. Tell us about something about your best friend, on the idea that who we know becomes what we know, and we'll discuss a lot of that later on this course, and a little bit about how this class fits into your future. Let's jump in. The U.S. Army does a lot of work and a lot of attention and a lot of training in the area of leadership and what the requirements are. So let's look at, this comes from the U.S. Army's leadership manual, and look at the requirements which they have for what an Army leader is. Now understand that in a military setting, you're training what they often refer to as war fighters, which is a tad different, so to speak, than you would find in civilian life. But we're still in a competitive situation, and if you look under what a core leader competence is of what an Army leader does, on the right column there, what does a leader do? Leads others, extends influence beyond the chain of command. The basic definition of leadership is more about influence than giving direct command and control. We always think in the military that you give an order, it gets obeyed. Well, the military has the same kinds of scenarios as you do in civilian life. Giving an order doesn't mean that something is going to get done. You need to be able to communicate. This is the environment you develop. Most importantly, you're responsible for other people. I have a friend of mine in my doctoral program who is a captain in the U.S. Marine Corps, and we were chatting one day, and I said something about responsibility a leader has for his subordinates, or his or her subordinates, and he said, "Oh, absolutely. That's like number one. Taking care of the people you're working for, you're responsible for their care and feeding," which in the short term, or we take it a little bit more, you as a leader in a civilian life are responsible for the assignments, you're responsible for the morale, you're responsible for, are people feeling valued, you're responsible for, are people able to do they have the tools and support they need in order to do the job. That's more of your responsibility than anything else. If they have a problem with payroll, if they have a problem with purchasing, as a manager, your job is to run interference. Your job is to protect them from political interference in other areas. You're responsible for your people. And lastly, of course, you're responsible for achieving results. Bit of an overview. Everybody can be asked to be a leader at some point. Think about what sort of leadership roles you've been called upon to play in your life. It might have been something from when you were growing up on a sports team, you became the captain, or were a leadership role, or it might have been in a team in one of your classes. It might have been an organization you belong to, fraternity, sorority. It could be a civic organization, it could be a religious organization, a youth group. All kinds of things. We carry on leadership roles on many, many different levels. It may not have been the person overall in charge, perhaps, maybe not the president of the organization, but nevertheless had leadership responsibilities. Over the past century or so, there's been a tremendous amount of research looking at leadership, and there are a number of different approaches which have been tried and passed on. The takeaway from this is, to this point, there has been no unifying theory as far as to explain how leaders work, where they come from, can they be trained, or they be born, or can they be bred? Are there differences? Is it about traits? Is it about behaviors? Is it about the situation? I would argue, and I don't stand alone in this, that fundamentally leadership is about relationships. It's about your interactions with people. It's affected by traits. It's affected by behaviors. It's affected by the situation. People can succeed in one place and fail somewhere else, fail one place, go someplace else and succeed. So we're seeing a number of different approaches emerging now, and entrepreneurial leadership, interestingly, is one of those areas, and an area which I personally have a research interest and planning my dissertation around, which will look at the different characteristics of leadership in an entrepreneurial situations versus established companies. Essentially that, and this is how the themes we're going to apply here in this class, is we talk about the leadership skills and competencies required at the point of creation from the organization, taking it through the point of when the company goes live, to the point of where the first product ships, to the point of at least 5 years out, and perhaps potentially I might get involved in a longitudinal study, perhaps even taking it 10 years out, but we'll see. The readings will deal with we'll take you through each of these different kinds of conceptualizations of leadership. Very much with it in the individual, the idea of this is great man theory, that leaders are great men. This going back 100 years. Today, of course, would be men and women. That's their certain traits, certain abilities, maybe their charisma. All these attributes come together in this great person, what makes him a leader. Yet, there's so many other examples of people who are leaders who don't necessarily fit this. There's not one model which cuts across, but what does cut across is the ability to influence. That cuts across all levels. So the argument is that each of us has unique leadership traits. The emphasis is that we have a context, that leadership is a process involving the leader. If you're going to be a leader, in order to be a leader, you have to have followers. So it's the relationships and interaction between leaders and fellowships. And lastly, we all are born with certain traits. The question still out there is some of these can be modified and changed in order to assume different positions, and different, such as a leadership position. Leadership is very much about action. Some of the theories about leadership is about behavior. Talks about it's not so much the individual traits; it's a matter of how people behave. And some could argue that in order to behave in the proper way, and as a leader, you need to have the proper traits, set of traits. So it's one of these chicken and the egg situations. Are you able? Do you have the capacity? Do you have the competencies? And my personal interest, and again, my dissertation theory will be looking at skills and competencies. I'm not suggesting, although I kind of I won't impose upon you the idea that it's about skills and capacities. I think there's other aspects to it, but fundamentally, does the person have the capacity to be a leader? Much the same way they have the capacity and the ability to be a leader in any other position. But I do believe it's about relationships. That if your followers will not follow, you're not a leader, or you're a failed leader. So it's very much an interactive process, not just one way, top down. Some of the research, very interesting looks at followership, which we'll talk about, but divides followers in 3 levels: passive, active, and proactive. Passive will be more recipient and will follow what they're told and the guidance they're given. Those who are active and proactive are more apt to assert and come forward with ideas and suggestions and recommendations to the leader to move things along. Much more of an interactive process rather than more of a passive, just receiving, but also, in fact, pushing the leader to do new things. So we talked about the skill. And some of the theory and the research which has been done is that successful leaders learn from their experiences, and talks about very specific kind of experiences which enables people to be leaders, particularly in entrepreneurial situations. And lastly, that ultimately it's the ability of the individual to influence a group to attain a common goal. It is interactive, and there's very much an ethical an ethical considerations. That we have examples of not good people, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and others, who were leaders who mobilized and motivated millions of people, yet were not ethically sound in any stretch of the imagination. Understand that much of what we're talking about does come from a perspective of coming from the United States and North America. In different parts of the world, there are different views of leadership, and we will talk a little bit about this, particularly for how we operate in hierarchies and and where there's more respect and deference to authority and how this is plays out. One study studied the impact of culture on leadership in something like 62 different countries, and there are some universally accepted characteristics of leadership, positive and negative. So there is some commonality within a dynamic research in a very dynamic field. So where do we stand? And why this course? That there is a demand. Companies of all stripes, startups, established companies, really looking for people with effect who are leaders. Leadership can be very demanding. The responsibilities can be heavy, but it can be extremely rewarding when you can see making a difference. And leadership need not be the top dog. Come in very many different levels within society and an organization. It could be within your work environment. It could be within school. It can be in civic organizations. Everything from a local homeowners association to a school board to planning commissions and on up the chain. I would argue that leadership is about traits, about ability, about skill, about behaviors, about relationships, and the ability to influence. And ultimately, what we'll be talking about, one of the many overarching themes here, is thinking about leadership as the ability to influence others. And as far as your own means and with looking at yourself as an individual, how you'll be able to practice